This is Politics by Jake. Most commentators merely report events. Jake decodes and reveals the hidden systems beneath the headlines. He exposes the enduring, sometimes generational patterns that govern history, politics, economics, and human behavior. Jake names the unnamed. He brings into focus the things that we're hiding, sometimes even in plain sight. And now, here's Jake.
Now, there are things going on in the Pacific, and you may say, well, Jake, what does this have to do with the election? I mean, come on. What does North Korea have to do with the Democratic Socialists of America or Donald Trump or, any of that, any of the rest of that? Well, I'll tell you, it has everything to do with it. Because underneath all of these stories is one question. What kind of government are we going to have? Not what kind do we say we have. Not what's written on the label, but what kind of government we are actually going to have. North Korea fires missiles, issues threats, and then tells us every Allied exercise is a preparation for invasion. I mean, they do this. They do it all the time. In other words, they provoke. And then they characterize their own provocation as a warning against somebody else's provocation. They say they're acting in self-defense. That's the propaganda line. And there are people who buy that. They go for that. That works for them. But the cranks, I should say, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and North Korea is one of the cranks, are very much provocative themselves. They're aggressive themselves. And now, of course, they're fortified by this increasingly dangerous relationship with Russia. They're a bloc now. They step in, they help each other. And against that background, Donald Trump abruptly ordered the joint United States-South Korean, it was called Ulchi Freedom Shield, military exercises that were scheduled for this past week. He ordered them scaled back. The exercises were not actually entirely called off. They were just shortened. That correction, that's important. South Korea's foreign minister told lawmakers and officials in Seoul, even American officials, had not known about Trump's order in advance. Now, stop there for a moment and think about that, will you? An alliance maintained for generations now, on one of the most dangerous borders on earth, altered by presidential fiat. And I'm not talking about the Italian automobile. A fiat is a declaration. It's kind of like so let it be written, so shall it be done. That's it. Remember that old the Moses when the Pharaoh says, "So let it be written, so shall it be done." That's a fiat. That's what it is. It comes from Latin. It's the subjunctive. Never mind. It means let it be. So let it be. Fiat. And the ally is not even properly consulted. He just says it. Trump just says it. Indeed, according to the South Korean foreign minister, people in our own government did not even know that it was coming. And there's been speculation that Trump was pressuring Seoul over its unwillingness to support American policy in the Middle East. And that motive has not been established in fact. I won't present it with fact, but look, it's a likely story for somebody like Trump. The decision is revealing enough. Trump publicly emphasized cost, his relationship with Kim Jong-un, the little rocket man with whom he has a bromance, and who in return says that Trump is a dotard or a dotard, which means that, well, read King Lear, will you? That's about a dotard. A dotard is someone who is in their dotage, who is in their elder age, with all of the things that go along with that, forgetfulness, so on and so forth. And his desire to reduce Pyongyang, others consider hostile. This is not alliance management. This is personal diplomacy conducted as theater. This is government reduced to appetites, to grievances, to enthusiasm. And God, Trump has all these grievances. That's all he has. We're learning from the results in the commentary on the primaries that Trump is abandoning Republicans and turning his back on them because they lost. And he's not going to support them, and they're afraid. Everybody's afraid. Everybody's afraid of Donald Trump. Just what he wants, really. So it's about his appetites. It's about his grievances, his enthusiasms, and the relationship of one man. Trump looks at alliance like this. He says, he didn't even think about the country. This is what he says. He says, what am I getting out of this? Are they praising me? Are they paying me enough? Are they doing what I want them to do today when I said them to do this today? Are they doing that? And if they're not, why should I care about them? See, he does not begin, and this goes back to what I frequently say. We don't need to get to the other things, and I'm probably jumping ahead of what I was going to say. We don't need to talk about his mental and psychological state. We don't need to talk about the fact that he's a bully. We don't need to talk about his age. We don't need to talk about any of those things. All we need to say is he does not begin with the durable interests of the United States. He does not begin with the credibility of the treaty system. With the Romans, that was big. You always obey the treaties. You always follow the treaties. He does not begin. Pacta sunt servanda. Pacts, treaties, agreements are your servants. You obey them. That's what the Romans said. Pacta sunt servanda. Okay. He does not begin with the cumulative value of deterrence, which was built year after year precisely so that nobody would have to discover whether the plan worked or not. He begins with himself. That's always where he begins. That's what I mean when I say his attitude towards government is rapacious. Government's not a trust to him that is temporarily placed in his hands. Sure, he'll say anything that he thinks you want to hear in order to get elected, but he doesn't consider it a trust. It's a possession. It's what should have been his anyway if he had not in the past been treated so unfairly. I've been treated it's so unfair. I've been treated so unfairly. It's a possession to him. Offices become instruments. Allies become customers. Power, public power, becomes personal leverage. Everything is judged according to whether it serves Donald Trump. And this should be an offense to every American. There's an old saying, and I reiterate it here, and I bring it up here. It should be a stench, a foul stench in the nostrils of every American. I don't care whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, that doesn't matter, or a liberal, or a progressive, or a conservative, or a reactionary. Well, I mean, I care if you're a conservative or reactionary, but I mean, there are those out there in the body politic. I mean, we have to acknowledge it. But I don't care what you are. If you will excuse the expression, a conservative, because, as I said, most people that call themselves are conservatives today, they're not conservatives. They don't really even know what it means. A conservative believes in slow organic change. A conservative believes in the old order of things, and that change should come only slowly. Really, what most conservatives today are is reactionaries. But let's play along, okay? Let's say you are a conservative. Conserve something, will you? Conserve the Constitution. Conserve the separation of powers. Conserve the lawful transfer of authority. Conserve the treaty commitments, pacta sunt servanda, and the institution that were built over decades, because no president, however vain, however brilliant, however beloved, however anything, is supposed to govern by whim. Trump admires strength, or what he mistakes for strength. He's drawn to Vladimir Putin, Kim Jong-un, Xi Jinping, presidents for life, one man, one vote, one time, kind of like the Muslim Brotherhood. That's what the deal was with that in Egypt, with Morsi. That was the proposition that was given to the the Egyptian electorate. One man, one vote, one time. Any insanity. Presidents for life, dictators, oligarchs, and billionaires, because they appear to operate without restraint, which is what he has always wanted to do, and which is what he has always tried to do. He sees rulers who can command, punish, enrich friends, frighten subordinates, and make institutions bend. To him, that's not corruption of government. To him, that's the point of government. But here's the pathetic thing. The dictators that he admires do not admire him in the same way that he admires them. They flatter him because they know they can use him. They understand him. They know that he's the poor little rich boy who wants to be like them, and who will fawn, and who will abruptly call off military exercises because I don't want to hurt the feelings of my friend, the little rocket man with 60 or 70 nuclear weapons. I mean, look, but this is what it is. They understand that his vanity and his fawning is an instrument. It basically oozes out of him. How can you miss it? I know I don't. I hope you don't. They see in him the possibility of weakening the United States from within. They don't like the international rules-based order that makes it so they have to toe the line in so many things, and they cannot just blatantly and abruptly and without any control whatsoever conduct their foreign policy in the rapacious way that they want to. So they want to weaken that international rules-based order. They want to weaken the United States, who has been for generations the guarantor of the international rules-based order. They want to weaken it from within. They want to separate it from its allies. Kim Jong-un did pretty good. Shoot one rocket into the EC. The EC is the Sea of Japan, by the way. Shoot one rocket into the Sea of Japan. Wow, that was good. That really worked. That's what they want to do. This is what I'm here to explain to you. This is what I'm here to tell you. This is what I'm here to show you, that he's like this. Break the international rule-based order, which imperfectly, certainly, sometimes hypocritically, certainly, has nevertheless kept the great powers from returning to the law of the jungle. And believe me, and I could speak much on this, and of course I have. I do it every week and every day. That's what would happen if there were no rules-based order. Kim Jong-un does not need to conquer the United States. He merely needs an American president who is such a suck-up, who is such a fawning little toady, and who regards an alliance just as an invoice. Like I said, what is it? What are we getting out of them? What am I getting out of South Korea? They didn't join me in the Middle East? Screw them. Cancel the exercises. You see, this is what I'm saying. Considers an alliance as an invoice that's due and payable, and a deterrence as an insult to a personal friend. Putin does not need Trump, similarly, to become a Russian agent. He is. He needs Trump to see NATO as a protection racket, Ukraine as an inconvenience, and the post-war international rules-based order as just a bad real estate deal that he's not getting anything out of. And again, he doesn't even consider what the United States is getting out of it. It's just all about what he gets out of it. She, president for life. Oh, he has to get reelected every 4 years, but he's president for life. The Emperor Xi, I call him, does not need Trump to love China. And it's funny because sometimes he even counsels Trump. How embarrassing. He needs the United States to become less predictable to its friends and more preoccupied with the moods of its leader. That's the danger, you see. And we do not have to get, like I said at the beginning of the show, we don't have to get into the psychiatric material. I'm glad to. I'm glad to talk about the certainty of the frontotemporal lobe dementia that is afflicting him, that is literally making, these are the frontal temporal lobes right here. These are shrinking in his brain pan. And every day at the age of 80, surely before this, because psychiatrists and other mental health professionals were talking about this in 2015. So basically they've been talking about it for a decade, and they've been calling out this warning about his malignant narcissism and about his physical infirmity and about the likelihood that he does have dementia. We don't have to talk about that, though. I have opinions about it. I just gave you some of them. You probably have opinions about it, but we don't need it. I've already talked about it. You could say, well, Jake, if you didn't need to talk about it, you shouldn't have talked about it. I'm sorry. I consider that it's my duty to make you aware of it. But my point is also, for those of you who say, Jake goes too far, Jake is not a psychiatrist. Well, I may not be a psychiatrist, but I play one on TV. I do have a minor in my undergraduate degree in psychology. So, I mean, I can sit in the room during the lectures. Let's put it that way. But we don't need it. In the end, for those of you who think that Trump is just the greatest, we don't need it. The constitutional behavior, or I should say the unconstitutional behavior, is in plain view. The conduct convicts him. He wants personal rule. Around him are, what in the old days would be called courtiers, palace courtiers, people who are frightened, people who have been compromised, people who are ambitious, eager for jobs, eager for access, eager for the lucrative life that may follow public office. Members of Congress, for example, know that crossing Trump can mean a primary challenge, a public humiliation, or the end of a future lucrative lobbying career, millions of dollars in lobbying. So what do? It's an awful state of affairs. Our elected officials and representatives, they bend. And then they try to explain it away by saying, oh, well, bending is loyalty. It's loyalty. You mistake it, Jake. You're trying to make it something it's not. We're just being loyal. We need a name for that faction now that we're coming up on the election. And I think a good name for them is the Kingmen. And these are Americans who may invoke the Constitution when it's convenient, wave it around, wrap themselves in it, tell you how much they love it, but whose conduct, and remember, deeds, not words, whose conduct shows that they prefer the will of a ruler, whenever the ruler is theirs, especially. Trump's great emotional instrument is grievance, He tells people that they've been cheated, they've been mocked, they've been forgotten, they've been displaced. And the thing about this is that some of the grievances are real. They are. We don't make any pretensions that our system is perfection. Not at all, especially with such people in it, such a great diversity of people who inhabit this country. Some are real, some are imagined, some are manufactured, some are sold back to the public as entertainment. But Trump performs their anger, and they mistake the performance for solidarity. They think he's with them. They think, like Clinton, he feels their pain. He doesn't, and that's the pathetic part. He had no intention whatsoever of resolving most of these grievances. The billionaire class does not intend to surrender wealth or power to these people wearing the red hats. Trump's politics requires the grievances to remain alive. A wound that heals can't be exploited at the next rally. So here's the fundamental question of 2026 that I kind of started out with. And I say it on the show all the time. What do I say? I say, welcome to the show. Welcome to Politics by Jake. I'm Jake. I'm your political commentator. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the fight. We've got an election on our hands. Now, in less than 100 days, we've got an election. So I mean 2026, not 2028. I know everybody wants to talk about 2028. Is he going to run again? So on and so forth, because that's the next presidential election. I am telling you that the existential election may be this one in front of us right now in less than 100 days. Will the United States proceed forward as a democratic republic? Will it decay into an oligarchy with, a few obligatory, desultory, surviving democratic forms? Or will it become a kingship in everything but name? Now, I ask my listeners and my viewers, are you for the Constitution? Are you for the Democratic Republic? Or are you a kingman? That is not a rhetorical flourish. That's the question. That's the immediate question of 2026. But a political coalition cannot defeat Trump merely by announcing that Trump is dangerous. It must answer the grievance he exploits. It must tell the working and middle class Americans what government is for, what the economy is for, and whose productive power actually sustains the country. Because he's lying to you about that too. Trump tells the people that the strength belongs to the billionaire, the oligarch, the technologarch, or technogarch if you prefer, the dictator, the boss, who can make a mistake while everybody else bends. The answer is not another personality cult. The answer is to identify the real source of national strength. The real strength of the United States is the productive capacity of its people. And that brings us to the economic argument and to one of the most successful acts of ideological theft in American politics. The Democratic Socialists claimed that healthcare, housing, public works, public power, education, labor rights, social insurance, public credit, and strategic public ownership belong to socialism. The Republican eagerly agrees with them. They are both wrong.
More of Politics by Jake after this.
And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Let's be blunt, shall we? America is litigious. It's unstable, and it's financially weaponized. If your name is on everything you own, you're a sitting duck. At Twain Consulting, we help you vanish legally, ethically, and permanently. From land trusts to layered LLCs, we teach you how to restructure your assets so the predators can't see them and can't touch them. This isn't a loophole. It's a strategy that the wealthy have used for decades. Isn't it time you got the same protection? Call Twain Consulting at 805-380-5699 or visit us online. Protect what's yours before someone else claims it.
And now, Politics by Jake continues.
Okay, this is Politics by Jake, and we're back. And on Politics by Jake, what I do is I break down political and economic reality so you can understand what's actually happening and how to position yourself. If you want this kind of observation and counsel applied directly to your situation, I also offer private one-on-one strategy session. Links in the description. And finally, you can find Politics by Jake on YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Podbean, most major podcast platforms. I'm on them. Okay? All right. So let's continue. And in continuing, I want to reiterate what I said in the closing segment. And this is something that I hear all the time, and it just really concerns me. I mean, it's like political doctrine, political speech, political observations. They don't mean anything anymore in the United States, which is, I guess, okay in a way because it gives me a show, it gives me a platform. But I'm going to reiterate what I said at the end of the first segment, the opening segment. The Democratic Socialists claim this. They claim that healthcare, housing, public works, public power, public education, labor rights, advanced education, public credit, higher education, strategic public ownership belong to socialism. And the Republicans go, yeah, that's right. It does. It really does. Yeah. Oh, they're right. Oh, we're going to win. We're going to win. Oh, that's right. They eagerly agree. This is just what they want to hear. They're both wrong. A public sector is not socialism. Now, we have to define our terms here, okay? Because like I said, American political language has like become defunct. It like doesn't exist anymore. It has almost become useless. It has almost become meaningless. A word is applied to 10 different things, and everybody shouts, and nobody defines anything, and then we wonder why the argument never advances. Socialism is not, in any instance in which the government does something. It's not. It's just not. It is not any instance in which the government owns something, builds something, regulates something, or guarantees something. I mean, if that's your definition, then every modern country is socialist. Every modern country is socialist. The United States, according to that, has been socialist from the establishment of the post office in 1789 and onward. You see, the word means nothing as presently constituted. The existence of a post office, getting back to this example, does not abolish capitalism. A municipal water system does not abolish capitalism and represent concomitantly socialism. Public schools do not abolish capitalism. They don't repudiate or rebuke capitalism. The Army Corps of Engineers does not abolish, rebuke, or repudiate capitalism. Social Security does not abolish, rebuke, or repudiate capitalism. The TVA, that's Tennessee Valley Authority, that flooded the area. There's a great movie. You really ought to watch it. You'd love it. It's called Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And it has as its backdrop the Depression, 1930s, and the Tennessee Valley Authority, which brought electric power to a large portion of the South. It's great. You love it. Very enjoyable. The Reconstruction Finance Corporation didn't abolish, repudiate, rebuke, or thwart capitalism. The interstate highway system did not do that. Public procurement of aircrafts, ships, medicines, semiconductors, communications technology does not do that. It does not thwart, abuse, or do violence to capitalism anyway. These are institutions, and institutions of a constitutional mixed economy. I say again, a constitutional mixed economy. Okay? There's a private sector, there's a public sector. Positively. Socialism properly refers, and I'm going to define it for you here, it refers to an economic order in which social or state ownership replaces private ownership across the commanding structure, the entirety. Understand? The commanding structure of production, and in which economic life is reorganized according to that principle. Now, communism goes further, puts all production in the hands of the state, but selective public ownership, regulation, social insurance, public works, public credit, they do not cross that line. Merely because a socialist organization supports them, they can support them. Alessandro Ocasio-Cortez can support it. It's interesting, since he won the election, they're calling him Doctor now. Dr. Abdul al-Sayed can support them, but it doesn't mean they're socialist. In other words, there is a difference between a policy tool and an economic system. And that difference is everything. And let me put this in the plainest possible terms, okay? Because I understand that you guys don't necessarily know this. I use the famous example. I don't understand my own electricity, and I can't fix my own plumbing. I need someone who understands that. So this is what I understand. I understand that you don't necessarily get it. that even though I know that you are waiting with bated breath for every daily clip from Politics by Jake and every long form show on the weekends on KCAA and on YouTube and on Rumble. I get it. I get it that you're waiting on that. But I get that you don't necessarily know all these things. Now, that was only half tongue in cheek, by the way. So I'm going to explain this in the plainest possible terms, okay? Imagine you possess the greatest automobile that was ever built, okay? The engine's powerful. The design is ingenious. It can cross a continent, incredible, carry a family, transport goods, connect communities, generate wealth wherever it goes. And then imagine that you refuse to maintain it. You won't put oil in the engine. You won't do that. You refuse to cool it. You refuse to replace a worn belt, repair a damaged road, supply clean fuel, or train anybody in the proper way to operate it. When the warning light comes on, you just ignore it or, cover it with a piece of tape or something like that. When the engine begins to knock, you accuse the mechanic of interfering with the free operation of the automobile. Finally, someone comes along and proposes what used to be called ordinary maintenance. Put oil in the engine. Yeah. Repair the road. That's right. Replace the broken part before it destroys the entire machine. And somebody jumps up and cries, "Socialism!" Socialism? I mean, come on, you're putting oil in the engine. It's ridiculous. Maintaining the engine, improving the engine, making a better engine, that's not abolishing the automobile. Repairing the road is not confiscating every vehicle. Supplying fuel is not communism. It's what you do if you expect the machine to move. And that is the point. We are expected to move forward. We're expected to produce. We're expected to build. We're expected to remain a country capable of doing things with a full set economy. You cannot consume the engine and then announce that the wreckage proves government should never have opened the hood. The broad working and middle population, listen to me, this is important. If you never understood this before, if nobody ever said it to you before, listen to me now because I'm saying it to you now. The middle class, it's the great economic engine of the country. It is the power, not that guy in the penthouse moving money from one account to another, not that guy who's a paper trillionaire for a week, who sends rockets up and half of them explode in midair, not the oligarch acquiring the fourth yacht, not the speculator who makes a fortune because the price moved in a direction he wagered it would move. The people, you, me, we are the engine. They are not decorative passengers to somebody else's automobile. They are the machinery that makes the economy go. Healthcare is maintenance of that engine. Education improves its importance, including higher education. Nutrition supplies its fuel. Housing gives it stability. Transportation connects human capacity with production opportunity. Recreation restores exhausted people so that they can think, so that they can recreate, so they can work, so they can create more, so they can parent, so they can participate in civic life. Social insurance prevents an illness, an accident, a layoff, or old age from destroying a lifetime of accumulated productive capacity. And so people can live longer because when they live longer, They can work longer, and when they work longer, they can produce more, and they can produce better. Now, I do not mean, and I want to be clear about this, that human beings exist to only produce. Human life has dignity beyond anything that can be entered in an economic table. But even if you insist upon speaking in the cold language of economics, which I kind of have been doing here, the conclusion remains the same. A country that neglects the health, the education, the security, and the development of its people is consuming its productive capital. It's eating the seed corn. We readily understand maintenance when the asset is owned by a corporation. A corporation depreciates machinery, budgets for repairs, trains employees, protects intellectual property, maintains inventory, and ensures valuable facilities. Nobody calls that charity. Nobody calls it socialism. It is called protecting the productive asset. But when the productive asset is the American people, suddenly maintenance is described as indulgence. A bridge can be infrastructure, but the engineer who designs the bridge is supposedly an expense. A factory can be capital, but the health of the machinist is supposedly consumption. A semiconductor plant is treated as a national asset, but the education of technicians who operate it becomes a handout. That is, that's economic illiteracy. And it's disguised as severity, but it's illiteracy. It sounds stern. It sounds responsible. It's actually the philosophy of running the machine without oil and calling the resulting fire that inevitably is going to occur fiscal discipline. The worker is not external to the economy. The family is not external to the economy. The school, the clinic, the home, the road, the library, park, power system, water system, and public institution that develop human capability are not ornaments hanging upon a supposedly private productive machine. They are among the conditions that allow production to occur at all. The middle class is especially important because it is not merely a wage category. It is a dense national structure of skills, expectations, purchasing power, property, competence, and civic stability. It includes employees and employers, tradespeople and professionals, proprietors and technicians, people who work with their hands, people who work with symbols, people who work with numbers, machines, bodies, laws, ideas. And that broad population supplies the demand for the goods the economy produces. It supplies savings for investment, taxes for public purposes, recruits for the professions and armed forces, customers for small businesses, volunteers for communities, and parents for the next generation. And when it expands, the economy gains depth and resilience. When it is hollowed out, a country may retain glittering financial valuations while losing the human substance beneath them. Predatory capital does not replace the engine. Oligarchs do not replace it. Speculators may profit from changes in the price of ownership without creating the corresponding productive value. A fortune may grow because rents rise, because a monopoly eliminates competitors, because assets are stripped, because debt is loaded onto a company, or because privileged information permits a better wager. That may be profitable. It is not, therefore, productive. It is not if A, then B. And before somebody writes in, as you do, and I appreciate it, but I'm just saying, before somebody writes in comments and says that I've declared war on every successful person in America, no. Capital is necessary. Risk-taking is necessary. Successful enterprise deserves reward. The argument is not that every wealthy person is useless or every financial transaction is predatory. The argument is that wealth and productive contribution are not synonyms. They are not synonyms. And an economy organized to reward extraction while refusing maintenance eventually cannibalizes itself. The New Deal understood this in very practical terms. It did not wait for ideological permission to prevent banks from collapsing, employ idle labor, electrify rural America, TVA, like I said, build dams, conserve soil, stabilize mortgages, construct schools and hospitals, and provide security in old age. It used public power because the productive system was breaking down and because private action alone could not and arguably would not, even assuming for the sake of the argument that it could, would not repair it. It did not abolish the automobile. It put oil in the engine, it repaired the road, it rescued the passengers, and it made the machine capable of moving again. That's where the argument must begin whenever somebody points at a public program in South Socialism. Ask what the program does. Ask whether it strengthens productive capacity, whether it corrects a market failure, whether it supplies an essential public good, protects national security, disperses opportunity, or prevents the destruction of human capital. Do not allow the label to answer the question before the facts have been examined. Suppose the United States nationalized TikTok, which I think is a good idea, by the way. Why? Because allowing a foreign adversary to control a platform, gathering data on Americans, and influencing the American public life creates an intolerable security risk? That's why. But just say suppose. That would be nationalization. It would not make the United States socialist. Let me give you another example, okay? Suppose Boeing became so strategically indispensable and so impaired by speculation, by financial engineering, by management failure or neglect, that the government took an ownership position to protect the aerospace workforce, military supply chain, civil aviation capacity, and accumulated engineering knowledge of the country. That could be prudent. That could be prudent national policy. That could be argued very strongly to be necessary national policy. It would not make the United States communist. The question would be what arrangement protects the nation's productive power, not which ideological label can be pasted onto the arrangement. This is thoroughly American. It's thoroughly American. Alexander Hamilton understood that national independence required productive capacity, public credit, infrastructure, and a government capable of shaping economic development. It's well known, and it's called the American system. Franklin Delano Roosevelt understood that private enterprise could not survive a systemic collapse by reciting slogans about private enterprise. The New Deal preserved the country by placing public power behind employment, production, banking, stability, infrastructure, electrification, housing, labor, and social security. That was not a surrender to socialism. It was a rescue and an improvement and a much needed improvement and redirection of the American economy. The National Industrial Recovery Act authorized a comprehensive program of public works, highways, public buildings, water systems, power transmission, conservation, flood control, low-cost housing, hospitals, naval vessels, and military aircraft. The WPA employed millions building roads, bridges, airfields, parks, public buildings, reservoirs, and rural electrical systems, TVA. TVA combined public power, flood control, navigation, agricultural improvement, industrial development, and national defense. The RFC used federal credit and capital where the private financial system could not or would not, as I said, would not act, even if they could. These policies did not treat workers as recipients of charity. They treated labor as productive power. That is the principle we must recover. The American workforce is among the great engine of it is, without a doubt, take this to the bank and take it to bed with you every night when you go to sleep and when you wake up in the morning. The American workforce is the great engine of the national economy. The health of the worker is productive infrastructure. Education is productive infrastructure. Nutrition is productive infrastructure. Housing is productive infrastructure. Recreation is productive infrastructure. A family capable of living rather than merely surviving is productive infrastructure. Just, like I said, help people live longer. They contribute longer. Help them remain healthy. They miss less work because they're not suffering so much. They produce more. Educate them, and the entire productive platform rises. Feed children properly, and the country receives stronger adults. Give people parks, libraries, music, sport, and time with their families. And you do not weaken the economy. You replenish the human beings who constitute it. This is not socialism. It is enlightened national self-interest. Indeed, it is elementary national self-preservation.
More of Politics by Jake after this.
This is Jake with Twain Consulting. Imagine, if you will, having the power to disappear from the prying eyes of creditors, identity thieves, nosy strangers, all while protecting what you've worked so hard to build. That's what virtual invisibility offers. It's not magic. It's smart legal and business strategy to shield your assets and privacy so you can live free, confident, and in control. Most people think that asset protection is only for the ultra-wealthy, but it's for anyone who wants peace of mind and financial security, including you. Don't wait until it's too late. Take control now. Call me at 213-465-0639 or go to facebook.com/Twain Consulting to learn how virtual invisibility can protect you and your family, because when you're invisible to risk, you're unstoppable.
And now, Politics by Jake continues.
All right, this is Politics by Jake, and we are back. Now, there's more to this. I've only been able to talk about a little bit of it on the show. There's quite a bit more, but the radio station, of course, only gives me so much time. They've got another show coming up after me, and I have to bring the KCAA part of the broadcast to an end at this point for this particular show. I'll be back next week on KCAA, but for this particular broadcast, I have to bring this to an end. So, for those of you listening on KCAA, thank you for being with me. I always appreciate it. If you want to hear the last portion of this, you can follow Politics by Jake on YouTube and Rumble, where the complete program will be available. And to those of you who are already watching and listening on YouTube or Rumble, stay with me. I'm signing off from the radio station now, but I'm not ending the program. We're going to continue after this and going to talk about the Democratic Socialists of America, the Fratricide Caucus, and the rest of the argument. For KCAA, this is Politics by Jake. I'm Jake, and we will see you the next time, God willing. And until then, bye-bye now.
And now, Politics by Jake continues.
And This is Politics by Jake. This is the podcast edition, and for the sake of our radio listeners, picking up where the radio broadcast leaves off. So, if that is you, welcome to the show, and to you podcast viewers who have been here from the beginning, now we continue. Now, a couple of things I want to point out before I get going on this, because we talk about these things, and, you know, Americans have really, in my opinion, and I marvel at it, except that there's great diversity, and I know that so many of us are involved in living our daily lives that we don't necessarily pay attention to these things like we should, but we should. We want to think that everything is okay, but Americans have been, honestly, this is my opinion, have been faked out. And I don't think that there's any other way to put it. We have been faked out by people who take advantage of what I call the egalitarian spirit of America. This idea that we're all Americans, that there really is no class here, that one of us is fundamentally as good as the other. And this is a wonderful idea, folks. It is one of the best things about the American system. But it also leaves you vulnerable. It leaves us vulnerable because you do not understand political speech. You think we don't need political speech. Oh, Republicans are this or Democrats are that, and that's all we need. And so when I say some of these things, they have no meaning to you beyond some, vague thing about Democrats and Republicans. You don't know, for example, what a conservative is. You don't know really what a liberal is. Most people couldn't really define either one if they were asked. And there are definitions. There are key definitions to these things, and they're important. And there are other words. A capitalist. What's a capitalist? Could you define that? Socialist. Could you define that? How about a communist? Do you know what that is? How about bourgeois? What's the bourgeoisie? Do you know that? Is that just some crazy French word that has a lot of vowels in it? It actually does. It's like two, 4, 5, 2, 4, 6, and then there's 8, and there's like 8 vowels in it. Why do I want to know a word like that? So anyway, this is my point. I belabored that a little bit. Pardon me. This is the podcast version, so we can do that. It's not the radio show anymore. Do you know? Do you know what socialism actually is? Do you know what communism actually is? And I say no. Most people do not know. But if we're going to be responsible citizens, and if we're going to carry the franchise of the vote, and I say, this is the sacred franchise of the vote, it behooves us to know. And it behooves us to always remember and to never forget. Because otherwise, we're compromised in our ability to carry out the mandate that comes with it. You cannot govern yourself if the people who you want to govern you are allowed to define every political word according to whatever happens to serve them at the moment. And one of the things that I want to talk about, preparatory to this conversation, that we're going to have about some things like the Democratic Socialists of America, is that Republicans have been hijacked by reactionary elements. These are reactionaries and fascists, and they're telling you that they're conservatives. They are not conservatives. Most of you who call yourself conservative, I'm convinced you don't know what a conservative is either. You might say, well, conservative, we conserve. That's what we do. And honestly, that's about as close as 95% of the people who call themselves conservatives can get to defining it. I talked about this earlier in the show. I actually defined what a conservative is. But the question now is, who wears the pants here? Who gets to supply the terms? Who gets to tell you where you belong and what you are permitted to think and what your own economic interest is? And so it is that I say, in prefacing the remarks I'm about to make, that it's important for you to understand your place, not the place somebody has assigned to you, but your actual place in the economy and in the constitutional order. And it is important to understand, furthermore, and I hate to say it, but that there are classes. This is unfortunate. I don't like this at all. I don't like this at all because I do partake of that excellent, what I consider to be excellent egalitarian spirit. I wish it were not so. I wish we were simply all Americans. It's a wonderful idea. In some respects, it's a wonderful illusion and a fantasy, but there are people who don't believe it. Uh, There are people who will say to you, who will wrap themselves up in the flag and talk about the American people, but who do not look at you that way at all. And they're somewhat like and I use this illusion for my Christian friends, what Jesus said about tombs. For my Christian friends, they're like whited sepulchres. Sepulcher is a tomb. It's actually it's like a grave house. Jesus, you would bury people in there. You didn't have to dig below ground, so on and so forth. And it was kind of like a monument to them. Jesus described the scribes and the Pharisees as whited sepulchres, which appear beautiful on the outside, but which on the inside are full of dead men's bones and all manner of disease and uncleanness. And that's what these people are in that respect. And I say that in that respect, and I am careful about this because I mean to qualify it precisely. They reject the idea that we are equal citizens. This is the qualification I mean to make, that they reject the idea that we are equal citizens, that we are all Americans, and that really there is really not any one of us who is by birth or by money or by social station entitled to own the rest. But no, in their minds, these people insist upon class. And it is like racism in this sense. It's one of these things that you never quite get rid of. And the American experiment has tried to get rid of it. We almost economically wiped ourselves out fighting a civil war in which hundreds and thousands of Americans were killed in order to try to get rid of it. And to a great extent, it has succeeded, but it still exists. There are people who see themselves as better than you, who see themselves as a different order of human being, and who, no matter what they say on the outside, separate themselves from you in their own minds. And those people, they gravitate towards money and towards power because money and power confirm the thing that they already believe about themselves. But here's the truth for you. The middle class, the middle class, a lot of you who are watching the show are middle class, lower middle class, upper middle class, whatever. That is right. That is right. Do you hear me? The middle class is the great economic engine of this country. And honestly, it's the great economic engine of all the earth. Why do you think all these advances are being made with a view towards eliminating your place, taking away your job, taking away your living, taking away your ability to take care of your family, taking away your peace? Why? It's because of this hidden disparity that I have described to you. Some people live in an egalitarian society without ever having felt egalitarian for 1 minute of their lives and the common cause of the United States of America. They do not believe that they are like you. They do not believe that they owe you anything. They do not believe that they owe the United States any fealty or common cause. They have persuaded you also that you are less. But I say to you, do not believe them, because you are more. And I say it again as a preface to my remarks. The middle class, and don't you ever forget it, live it, learn it, know it, because you're going to be tested on it, and you're being tested right now. The middle class is the great economic engine of this country, and by derivation, of the earth. I could do a whole show on that. Maybe I will do a whole show on that, but I say it now in order to orient us, because if you do not understand where the productive power actually lies, you won't understand the fraud that is being perpetrated from both directions. And now, down the road we go. Welcome to Politics by Jake. Welcome to the KCAA listening audience that has come over from YouTube and Rumble to watch the rest of this. And welcome to my viewers who typically watch anyway on YouTube and Rumble and who have been here from the start, because honestly, this is where it begins to get good. Now, look at the economic promises advertised by the Democratic Socialists of America. In this program they call Workers Deserve More: health care, housing, public energy and transit, a shorter work week, better wages, free public education, union rights, public investment, public ownership in certain strategic areas. Fine. Nearly every useful idea on that list can be argued through the New Deal, which already exists and has existed since the 1930s through the American system. Alexander Hamilton, Henry Clay, through the general welfare, through national security, or simply through the requirements of a modern mixed economy. You do not have to become a socialist because you think that's the only place these things exist. No. You don't have to become a socialist to understand that a family cannot contribute to the productive power of the country if one illness bankrupts it. You do not have to abolish capitalism to understand that workers require schools, they require roads, they require hospitals, power, water, credit, transportation, and some reasonable measure of security. None of those useful measures proves that socialism is necessary. Not at all. And this is where definitional fraud begins, which is what this section is titled. Because the movement takes familiar American measures, it exaggerates some of them, it distorts some of them, it attaches other ideological commitments to them, and then says, behold, this entire package is socialism. No, it is not. Some of it, may appear in the socialist dialectic. Some of it may point in a socialist direction, but much of it is public provision inside a mixed economy. That's what it is. And this country's been doing that. And this is the thing that you may not understand. This country's been doing that already in one form or another since Alexander Hamilton. Yes, one of the founding fathers. Since Henry Clay, since Abraham Lincoln, since Theodore Roosevelt and Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And you do not get to walk, you democratic socialists, or those who like to posture and portray yourselves that way. You do not get to walk in at the end of the parade, so to speak, paste your label on the instruments that have already existed all this time, and announce that you are the one in actuality and in truth who composed the music. That mislabeling performs two services. Neither of them is salutary at all. Neither of them, it allows the right to shout communism at every public program. It allows the DSA to claim ownership of the policies it did not invent. We should reject both of these frauds. We should not allow the Democratic Socialist Party of America, the DSA, to steal the New Deal. The New Deal exists. It's been around since the 30s and is the natural conclusion of the American system of Alexander Hamilton, Clay, who I said, Lincoln, Theodore Roosevelt, so on and so forth. We should not allow the Republican right to burn it down merely because somebody pasted a socialist label on it. The public sector belongs to the American people. The New Deal belongs to American history. Working class security belongs inside the Democratic Republic. We do not have to surrender at all any of these things to socialism. And so the indictment, therefore, does not begin with the fact that the DSA says that workers deserve more. Workers do deserve more. That is plain. The indictment begins with the difference between the useful measures and the political conduct attached to them, because the economic program is presented as the great center of the movement, but the political energy repeatedly migrates somewhere else, towards identity, symbolic warfare, Israel and Palestine, gender doctrine, police abolition, immigration maximalism, and the conquest of offices that are already safely democratic. It says working class, but who does it organize against? Not primarily the Republican office holder in the red district, not primarily the corporate concentration that governs credit or production or employment, and increasingly the ordinary conditions of life. Too often, the actual target, the target upon whom the money is spent, the organizers are deployed, the moral fury is unleashed, is another Democrat in a deep blue primary. In other words, someone whose seat is basically safe. That's not a working class movement behaving like a class movement. That's like a faction behaving like a faction. And the difference is decisive, because a class movement that expands solidarity, a sect narrows it. See? A class movement asks what the worker in Detroit, in Milwaukee, in Queens, in rural Michigan, the Bronx, Florida, the industrial Midwest has in common. A sect begins by listing the language that the worker must use and the international causes that worker must affirm before being permitted to enter the room. A class movement wants power sufficient to govern. A sect wants leverage sufficient to punish heretics. The economic demands may be genuine. I do not deny that. But when they become this bright curtain behind which the faction conducts a different sort of politics, remember the Wizard of Oz? Remember when the actual person pulling the strings was revealed? What did they say to try to discount it? Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. Never mind him. But he was the one working everything. So at that point, they ceased to be the organizing principle. And that's what I mean when I say these are not true socialists in any coherent working class sense. I am not saying that have failed an examination in Marxist doctrine. I am saying that they take policy instruments already established in the American tradition. They detach them from the New Deal rationale of national development and the general welfare, and they relabel them as socialism, and then they use them as the attractive frontage, the attractive signage, so to speak, with flashing fluorescent and neon lights for a different operative method. Ideological entrism, identity factionalism, and institutional capture. Now, before somebody says that I have ignored the conditions which make that program attractive, let's deal with those conditions honestly. All right, workers do deserve more. American productivity rose for decades, while the reward to ordinary labor, it didn't rise with it. It didn't keep up with it. Medical care can ruin a family financially, even when that family has insurance. Young people enter adulthood carrying an educational debt, and they face a housing market, which the price of admission has basically escaped ordinary income. Private equity acquires hospitals, nursing homes, housing, businesses. It extracts the value, it loads the institution with debt, and it leaves the community to absorb the damage. This is what Mitt Romney did. There's a famous document, well, famous, infamous, at the time called When Mitt Romney Came to Town. He's a predatory capitalist, and he was considered to be a leading presidential candidate. He was so grandiose, he thought he was going to win. And so when he was told that he lost, he had no limousines because he thought he was going to use the country's limousine service, but he was the challenger and he lost. And so he had to hurry in order to hire a private limousine service to take him. What a and this is considered to be a great man. He's not. He said, never mind what he is. He's not a great man. He's a predatory capitalist. That's what he is. And this is what they do. Monopoly and financial concentration have given to private, and this is important to understand. Monopoly and financial concentration have given private institutions powers that begin to resemble government, except that there is no vote, there is no franchise, and that there's no democratic accountability. Those are not imaginary grievances. They are not products of excessive sensitivity. They are structural failures. Universal health care is not an absurdity. It is not inherently socialist and therefore should be rejected. Public housing is not an absurdity and it is not inherently socialist thing which should therefore be rejected. A stronger legal right to organize a union is a part of the New Deal inheritance. Public investment in energy, transit, infrastructure, research, and industrial capacity. These all belong to the American tradition of nation building. The wealthiest society in human history can ask why full-time work no longer guarantees a secure life without first agreeing to abolish capitalism. And that's you. And you can ask that question, and you ought to. Indeed, ladies and gentlemen, these are precisely the questions an effective opposition should use. That's something that Trump should own. Trump tells working people that immigrants, university, transgender teenagers, urban crime, foreign allies, disloyal officials, if they go against Trump, are the reason their lives feel insecure. There's always this enemy du jour, this enemy of the week. There's always somebody weaker than the billionaire who you have invited to blame. And while you're looking at that person, what disappears? The concentration of economic power disappears. The tax benefits disappear. The deregulation disappears. The contracts, the access, the influence, the rape of the treasury. All of it disappears behind the spectacle. The corporations and the billionaires receive material benefits. The crowd receives an enemy. That's the bargain, you see? A serious New Deal movement could expose it. It could tell the warehouse worker and the small business owner that both of them are being squeezed by the concentrations of market power. It could tell the rural hospital and the urban clinic that both are the victims of a healthcare system, financing system designed purely around extraction and not really around healthcare. Healthcare is just one of those things that we use in order to extract. It could unite tenants, indebted homeowners, and young families around the artificial scarcity and financialization of housing. It could make Donald Trump answer for the material condition of the very people whose grievance he harvests. That's the opening history has given the left. And that's why the DSA's failure is not merely an eccentricity. It is a squandered opportunity. Every hour spent making an ordinary voter memorize the culture's vocabulary is an hour spent explaining why the voter's medical bill is indecipherable. Every dollar spent defeating a serviceable Democrat in a safe district is a dollar not spent organizing the nurse, the machinist, the warehouse worker, the truck driver, or the small businessman represented by a Republican. Every declaration that half the Democratic coalition is morally contaminated makes it easier for Trump to pose as the only politician who will accept people without requiring them to pass an ideological examination, which is also bull. The ideological examination exists. It's Trump. He's the ideological examination. Now, the DSA correctly identifies oligarchical concentration as a threat. That's important. That's good. But it falsely tells Americans that they must choose socialism in order to answer it. And when its politics drives people towards the oligarchs' chosen demagogue, the diagnosis and treatment move in opposite directions. That's the tragedy underneath the comedy of all this. The country needs a renewed New Deal. That's what it needs. More of the politics of production, public credit, infrastructure, labor power, social insurance, regulated finance, national development. And what it is too often offered instead is a politics of cultural sorting, decorated with economic promises, and mislabeled as socialism. Now, the ultra-left tells us that it fights harder. All right. Arguendo. Let us accept, just for the sake of the argument, that it fights harder. Harder against whom? That is not a small question. That is the question. If its function were to serve as an attack dog against MAGA, to find vulnerable Republicans, organize neglected working people in red and purple territory, force Republican incumbents to defend their records, and widen the Democratic map, then it would have an obvious strategic value. And where it does, I will give it credit. I will. Angie Nixon's recent victory in the Florida Democratic Senate primary, is a case worth watching precisely for that reason. She is a DSA member who has now won a statewide major party nomination in a state that Trump carried. And she must go out now and contest Republican power where Republican power is strong. Good. That's the test that I'm talking about. Her primary victory does not prove that she can build a general election majority, though, but it puts the theory in the proper field. And if she adds voters and makes the Republicans defend Florida, that is not fratricide. That is external fight. That's an external fight. But that's not the movement's characteristic electoral mood. That's not typical. Its preferred battlefield is the Democratic primary. Its preferred target is a Democrat. Its safest habitat is a district where the general election is very nearly decided before the primary begins. That's why I call it the Fratricide Caucus. It fights the people standing next to it, while the people across from it retain power. And in case you don't know, fratricide, that's the killing of your brother. Politically, it means spending your money, your organizing skill, your media attention, and your moral fury upon people who are already part of the coalition required to stop the greater threat. And they're already there. Now, before we go any further, that does not mean Democratic incumbents have a right to office, a divine right. They do not. Primaries are legitimate. The old saying, political saying, is true. There are only two ways to run. One is unopposed and the other is afraid. Seniority can become stagnation. Some Democrats are incompetent. Some are corrupt. Some are timid. Some are simply wrong. And sometimes all four qualities assemble themselves in the same person. But strategy requires proportion. If every disagreement with Hakeem Jeffries or Chuck Schumer is treated as treason while Trump is turning the presidency into a royal court, something has gone badly wrong. If the movement's sharpest language is reserved for Democratic voters who have not yet submitted, then it is not building a majority. It is disciplining a congregation. And Hassan Piker gave us the language of the congregation after Abdul el-Sayed's narrow victory in the Michigan Democratic primary. Now, let me be precise here. I want to, because precision matters. El-Sayed does not identify himself as a democratic socialist. He's not a DSA member, and he was not endorsed by the DSA. I'm not going to conscript him into an organization in which he doesn't belong because his candidacy attracted people from that political ecosystem. But Piker was one of his most famous endorsers, and the reaction is relevant because it demonstrates what happened when the incentives of the influencer collide with the requirements of the candidate. El-Sayed called for unity. Piker delivered instead a profanity-soaked message to the doubters. And the essential point was this. People saying Abdul had bridges to mend were unbelievably Islamophobic, followed by the demand, do you want to win or not? Lock in. Now, listen to that and think about the political logic, okay? Not the emotion of it, not whether you enjoyed watching somebody you dislike get cursed out on the internet. Think about the political logic. You narrowly win a bitter primary in a purple state. Abdul el-Sayed received 48.5%, Haley Stevens received 47.5%, and Mallory McMorrow, who had withdrawn too late to leave the ballot, still received about 4%. The withdrawn candidates' votes was several times larger than the final margin. We cannot say that every one of these voters would have gone to Stevens. What we can say is that their redistribution could have changed the outcome. That is a narrow victory. That's what we're talking about here. It's a victory, And I'm not taking that away from him, but it is not, the storming of the Winter Palace, so to speak. Nearly half the Democratic electorate chose somebody else. And under those circumstances, the first task is persuasion, gratitude, humility, reassurance, coalition building. Piker's answer is accusation. You do not need to be persuaded. You need to obey. And if you remain skeptical, the skepticism itself becomes proof of your moral corruption. That's great stuff, huh? The circularity is perfect. Disagreement proves guilt. And guilt disqualifies the disagreement. That is not how a movement wins a general election. That is how an online personality increases engagement. Those are different enterprises, folks. A campaign must add people. A content machine can make money by setting them on fire. And I am not saying anti-Muslim bigotry is imaginary. It is real. It was used during the primary. It is already being used against El Sayed in the general election, and it ought to be condemned plainly. But if every doubt about a Muslim candidate is Islamophobia, then no political criticism of that candidate is possible. And the accusation ceases to identify the bigotry which is actually there, because it has been made to cover everything. That does not protect the moral force of the charge. It spends it. Michigan is not a seminar room. It is a battleground. El Sayed must now defeat Mike Rogers in an election, and this has implications for control of the United States Senate. The question is not whether El Sayed can electrify the people who already agree with him. The question is whether he can build a coalition broader than the one he assembled in the primary. Piker's method just makes that harder. And therefore, whatever is stated opposition to Trump, the political effect of that conduct is to help Trump's party. That's the Fratricide Caucus in one scene, in one take. And on this, the timing makes this behavior especially reckless. I mean, really, control of Congress may turn on a handful of seats. The Senate map requires Democrats to defend what they have while winning in states where no ideological faction constitutes a majority by itself. The House requires not merely enthusiasm in blue cities, but persuasion in the suburban, exurban, industrial, and mixed districts where voters split tickets and distrust both parties. Under those conditions, politics is addition. You remember addition. You put another number on your side of the ledger, and the total becomes larger. This is not especially abstruse political science theory. The Democratic Party is not a philosophical society. It's not a debating society. It's an ungainly electoral coalition containing organized labor, black voters, Hispanic voters, Asian American communities, Jewish voters, Muslims, secular progressives, suburban professionals, environmentalists, social democrats, liberals, moderates, institutionalists, and former Republicans who are all frightened by Trump. These people do not agree on everything. No national majority ever has. The party's weakness is obvious. It can be timid, managerial, incoherent, captive to donors. But its heterogeneity is not merely a defect, it is the raw material of a majority. The Fratricide Caucus looks at that coalition and sees impurity. It wants every component to adopt the hierarchy of issues preferred by the faction. It treats disagreement over Israel, policing, immigration, gender, or constitutional structure not as a matter for persuasion and compromise, but as evidence of moral failure. That's how coalitions die. I mean, not usually with a trumpet blast. One insult, one loyalty test, one expelled constituency at a time. Black voters in Detroit do not owe a candidate support because that candidate uses the language of racial justice. Jewish voters do not owe a candidate support while being told that concern for Israel makes them accomplices to genocide. Working class Hispanic voters do not owe a movement support when their views on religion, family, crime, or immigration are dismissed as false consciousness. Union households do not owe allegiance to activists who appear interested in workers principally as a word in a program title. Votes must be earned. Bridges must be built. Doubts must be answered. Piker's outburst reverses this obligation. The candidate does not owe skeptical voters persuasion. Skeptical voters owe the candidate submission. And there is a brutal asymmetry in American politics. Republicans can often survive internal extremism because geographical distribution, the Senate, the Electoral College, gerrymandering, and rural overrepresentation give them structural advantages. Democrats require broader numerical coalitions to obtain comparable power. That may be unfair. It is, nevertheless, the field upon which the game is being played, and has for some time, by the way. A faction that makes the Democratic coalition narrower is therefore not practicing brave politics merely because it speaks loudly. It is increasing the probability that the presidency, Congress, the courts, and administrative state remain in the hands of a movement it itself claims is fascist. And if you sincerely believe that Trump represents an existential danger, electoral strategy cannot be some secondary matter to which you attend after your moral performance is complete. It becomes a moral obligation. You cannot announce that the building is on fire and then block the doorway because the people carrying the water failed your ideological inspection. The water wasn't pure enough. The buckets weren't pure enough. They weren't made of the right stuff. At that point, I am entitled to ask whether you actually want the fire extinguished or whether you have discovered that the fire itself is the thing that gives you authority over the doorway. Now, there's a history to this political method. I think that a lot of times we think, and it's understandable, it's really understandable, that these things come out of nowhere and that they're the new thing, but they're not. There's a history to this. There's a history to all of this. That's part of the purpose for this somewhat lengthy podcast that I'm doing, more than usual, to explain these things to you. It's very important that you understand. So stay with me, and I thank you for being on the show and watching. All right. This is where we come to Trotsky. And I had thought, for some reason that Trotsky was dead by 1933. He was not. He was very much alive in 1936. He was not living especially comfortably, and he was not living safely, but he was alive, and he was still being Trotsky, the revolutionary, the polemicist, the organizer, the rabble-rouser, the divider, the permanent oppositionist. The loyal opposition is another way to describe such people, and master of the disciplined faction. He had been expelled, of all things, expelled from the Soviet Union in 1929. He lived first in Turkey, then he moved to France, then Norway, and finally Mexico, where a Stalinist assassin murdered him in August of 1940. And Trotsky was not a social reformer looking for a comfortable place inside an existing Democratic Party. He did not enter political institutions because he had developed affection for their leaders or loyalty to their settled purposes. He entered them because they contained people he wanted to reach, or putting it in another way, less politely, because they contained people he wanted to detach from their existing leadership and organize for his own purposes. In 1934, France had entered a period of intense political danger. Fascist and reactionary leagues demonstrated violently in Paris on February 6th. The European left was still absorbing the catastrophe in Germany, where division between communists and social democrats had helped leave the road open to Hitler and Kristallnacht. French socialists and communists were moving toward united action, and workers, especially young workers, were becoming radicalized. Trotsky's own French organization was tiny. And a tiny revolutionary sect standing outside the gate can publish manifestos, denounce everybody, possess a perfect doctrine, and remain politically irrelevant. It may be right about everything and in contact with almost no one whose allegiance it requires. And so Trotsky proposed what became known as the French turn. The name sounds almost elegant. The method was not elegant, no. It was practical, it was tactical, and it was destructive of the host party's repose, which, from Trotsky's point of view, that was part of its usefulness. His followers would enter the much larger French Socialist Party, the SFIO, and they would not enter because they had ceased to be Trotskyists. They still were that. They would enter as an organized current with their own convictions, their own relationships, discipline, publications, and objectives. Inside the larger party, they could meet radicalizing workers, address meetings, influence debate, recruit young people, challenge the established leadership, and assemble a stronger revolutionary formation. And the host party looks at this and says, wonderful, new members, energy, youth, activity. The interests, the Trotskyists, masquerading as interests, they look at it and they say, access, a political population. The host thinks it's acquiring people. The interests think that they are acquiring a host. If you gather my meaning here, those are not the same transaction. That's different things going on. And that is the essence of what has come to be known as entrism, Entrism. For those of you, who want to look it up, entrism is not ordinary coalition politics. Every political party, contains factions. It contains interest groups, reformers, rebels, other ambitious people, nor is every primary challenge de jure, de facto entrism. Parties must remain capable of renewal. Incumbents must remain accountable. Entrism is more specific. A smaller organization enters or uses a larger organization while retaining a separate political identity and discipline. The larger organization supplies the ballot line, the legitimacy, the audience, the infrastructure, and the accumulated loyalty of the voter. The smaller organization supplies the cadre, the internal coordination, the doctrine, the endorsements, and the organized pressure. And the interest does not necessarily intend to strengthen the host as the host presently exists. It doesn't want to do that. It may intend to redirect it, capture portions of it, recruit from it, split it, or eventually emerge from it with the greater power. The host believes it is acquired, as I said, energetic new members. Great God, this is what we want. The interests, they believe they have acquired a host. Now, Trotsky's French experiment, the French turn, didn't conquer France. It did not single-handedly destroy the French political order. His forces were far too small. But let us not convert a revealing tactic into a mythology, okay? Merely because the mythology makes for better radio. But the intention was unmistakable. Trotsky did not regard the existing party's stability, its leadership, or its internal peace as sacred. If disruption advanced revolutionary organization, disruption was not an unfortunate side effect. It was evidence, rather, that the tactic was working. By 1935, the French socialist leadership was moving against the Trotskyists, and Trotsky was advising his followers to leave and build a new revolutionary party, the French turn. Therefore, was not a marriage. It was a maneuver. And in 1936, Trotsky urged a similar course in the United States. The Workers' Party, pay attention. This is where it begins. I told you, it's beginning to get good. This is the part where it gets good. This is where it comes from. This is where the DSA comes from. A similar course in the United States. The Workers' Party of the United States entered the Socialist Party of America. The American Trotskyists concentrated considerable attention upon the Socialist Youth Organization, developed an internal current, recruited supporters, fought over the direction of the party, and were expelled in 1937. In 1938, they formed the Socialist Workers' Party. And again, entry was not conversion. This is not the doctrine. The larger party was the field upon which the smaller revolutionary organization could increase its forces. Now, why does this history matter? It matters a lot. I mean, am I saying that every DSA member has a portrait of Trotsky hidden behind the television set? No, of course not. It does not prove that every DSA member is a Trotskyist. The DSA contains competing tendencies, varying philosophies, ordinary reformers, committed activists, ambitious politicians, social democrats, Marxists, and people who simply want health care and affordable housing. History is not a rubber stamp that makes different organizations identical, but history gives us a vocabulary for recognizing a method. And the DSA is not the Democratic Party. It has its own membership, its dues, its chapters, its conventions, its leadership, its endorsement, discipline, publications, factions, and political identity. Yet its candidates frequently use the Democratic ballot line. Its activists work inside Democratic primaries. Its most visible electoral successes frequently come from defeating Democrats in constituencies Democrats already strongly control. And within DSA discussion, there has been an explicit argument over what activists call the dirty break, which is to use the Democratic ballot line, tactically build an independent socialist organization, and prepare eventually for a separate political formation, a third party. Other members favor realignment, an indefinite party surrogate relationship, or what critics have called the dirty stay. Good words, good phrase. The organization has argued over the destination. The common fact is the terrain. The Democratic Party supplies the principal ballot line. The Democratic primary supplies the principal arena. And that is where Trotsky's method becomes illuminating. Because a faction can speak constantly about the external enemy while devoting its most organized activity to the internal host. Republicans become the enemy in theory, in advertising, and in general election rhetoric. Democrats become the people actually encountered in the primary, challenged for office, disciplined in public, and removed from power. The characteristic victory is therefore not the defeat of a Republican, which is what you would assume you would want. Rather, it is the acquisition of territory inside the Democratic coalition. And that is why the phrase Fratricide Caucus describes more than bad manners. If the Democratic Party is merely a host, then fighting Democrats is not an embarrassing distraction from the mission. It may be the mission by which the faction grows. So the strategic question, it's brutally simple. Is this organization building the Democratic coalition required to defeat Trump, or is it using that coalition as the raw material from which to build power for itself? Ask that question without hysteria and without guilt by association. Ask it empirically. Where is the money spent? Where are the organizers deployed? Which races receive attention? Who is denounced most ferociously? Which incumbents are actually defeated? Does each victory add a seat to the anti-Trump majority, or does it merely change the identity of a Democrat occupying a seat that was already blue to begin with? Trotsky understood very well that the host party could become the battlefield. The Fratricide Caucus gives us the reason to ask whether it has become the battlefield again. Okay. Now, let's take a moment and look at Zoran Mamdani. He's an interesting guy because Mamdani is presented as evidence that the new left can defeat Trump through, energy, authenticity, and boldness. He's the great rebuke to the timid Democrat. He is resistance with a smile, a very good social media department. And then, when he was mayor-elect, he met Donald Trump at the White House. The meeting was cordial. Trump praised Mamdani's campaign, called it the conversation productive. Mamdani has also called it productive and emphasized their shared admiration for New York and the need to deliver affordability. Now, there's, nothing inherently wrong with the mayor meeting the president. Let us not, be foolish. A mayor, especially of a city like New York, has obligations to a city. New York depends upon federal elections, federal decisions. Adult government sometimes requires speaking with people who one opposes. Franklin Roosevelt spoke with Stalin. That did not make Roosevelt a Stalinist. So the meeting in and of itself is not evidence that Mamdani endorses Trump. And I'm not going to say that. We do not need to overcharge the indictment. The conduct is interesting enough, however, when accurately described. It is evidence of something more subtle. The theatrical language of existential resistance often begins to dissolve the moment institutional power enters the room. Outside the room, Trump is a fascist, a racist, a threat, a would-be tyrant. Inside the room, there is a shared admiration for New York, productive conversation, and a search for common ground. And perhaps that is simply governing. Fine. Say so. But then stop selling maximal politics, will you? As a permanent moral war in which compromise by an ordinary Democrat proves corruption. Admit that governing requires transactions, okay? Admit that it requires coexistence, compromise, and this dreadful word, persuasion. The deeper problem is the asymmetry. The ultra-left treats ordinary Democrats as collaborators, sellouts, neoliberals, imperialists, or enemies of the people. And yet, when confronted by the man it identifies as the central authoritarian danger, it discovers civility and pragmatism. Why is that? Because the faction is harshest where it expects to dominate and more accommodating where actual power can punish it. Again, that is not direct support for Trump. It is the performance of resistance combined with the practice of accommodation. And the performance is aimed largely at other Democrats. Okay. Now, the DSA program is called Workers Deserve More. Fine. I agree with that. Workers do deserve more. The title, that's not the problem. A title is not proof. You do not become a working class movement by placing the word workers at the top of the page any more than the Democratic People's Republic of Korea becomes democratic because it managed to fit the word into its name. The test is whether working people recognize themselves in the movement, organize through it, trust it with power. And there's an electoral pattern here, which deserves to be examined carefully. Genuine strength in highly educated, ideologically concentrated urban areas, weakness or underperformance among some of the constituencies the movement claims to speak for, and narrow outcomes that are later described as popular uprisings. Francesca Hong, a DSA member and a candidate for governor in Wisconsin, narrowly lost the Democratic primary to David Crowley, 39.8% to 39.3%. Wow. And her support was real. Her strength in Madison was real. But Madison is also an unusually progressive university city. And Madison is not a substitute for a statewide working class coalition. El Sayed's victory was real. So was its 1-point margin, and we need to be aware of that. Mamdani's mayoral victory was real, but one election in an overwhelmingly Democratic city does not, by itself, prove the existence of a national working class realignment. Daria Eliza Avila Chevalier's victory over Adriano Espaillat in New York's 13th Congressional District was real. It was a meaningful victory. It demonstrated organizational power. But again, it was a Democratic primary in an already solid blue constituency. It demonstrates the ability to capture a Democratic nomination. It does not by itself demonstrate the ability to defeat MAGA, where MAGA is strong. And so, the Deep South, for example. And so we come back to the central strategic test. Does the movement add voters to the anti-Trump coalition, or does it merely rearrange the furniture, so to speak? And by that, I mean to say merely arrange power within that coalition while driving some of its existing voters away. If you remove a Democrat from a safe seat and replace it with a DSA member, you may have changed the ideological composition of the caucus. You may not necessarily have gained one vote towards taking the House. And if the primary leaves ethnic groups, religious groups, moderates, older voters feeling insulted and unwanted, the ideological victory must carry a general election cost somewhere else. The ultra-left describes this as courage. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's simply choosing the battlefield where the risk is the lowest. If you want to demonstrate a national working class movement, go to the frontier, okay? Go to Peoria. Organize the warehouse worker, the home health care aide, the machinist, the truck driver, the small town nurse, the indebted farmer, the non-union service worker, and the small business owner in counties that voted for Trump. Don't begin by explaining that they're culturally defective, Hassan Piker. Begin with wages, okay? Begin with credit. Begin with medical bills. Begin with housing, industrial decline, predatory capitalists, the right to organize. That would be New Deal politics in actual practice. Go where the need is. Organize the people who produce. Build a national majority around the general welfare. Now, there is a philosophical background to this politics. Stay with me. I'm not going to turn the show into a graduate seminar. There won't be any examination at the end. Postmodernism is not one doctrine. It would be too crude. Tempting, but too crude to say that every postmodern thinker simply believed nothing is real. Lyotard, Foucault, Derrida, different men, different questions, different conclusions, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise merely because it would make the polemic easier. But several recurring ideas entered academic and political culture. Suspicion of universal or totalizing explanations, the so-called meta-narratives of progress, reason, Christianity, Marxism, liberalization, or nation, attention to the relationship between knowledge and power, skepticism that language transparently represents a stable reality, emphasis upon perspective, discourse, identity, and the social construction of categories. And some of those ideas are useful. Institutions do hide power behind claims of neutrality. Language can smuggle assumptions into a debate. Official histories can erase people. Universal principles sometimes become masks worn by particular interests. The problem begins when suspicion becomes total. Because once you have poured acid upon every standard, like Holden Caulfield and Catcher in the Rye, for example, you do not get to act surprised when there is no standard left by which to condemn the thing you dislike. If every claim to truth is merely a bid for power, then the claim that fascism is evil is also merely a bid for power. If there is no common reality and only narratives, then evidence cannot settle a dispute. Victory belongs to the fashion that controls the institution, the vocabulary, or the platform. If moral principles are only expressions of identities, then contradiction is no longer disqualifying. My side may do what your side is forbidden to do, because morality is no longer universal. It's positional, you see? And that helps explain a politics in which people condemn cults of personality while building influencer cults, condemn division while calling skeptical Democrats bigots, demand that campaigns listen to marginalized communities while refusing to listen to communities that vote the wrong way, and preach solidarity while treating disagreement inside the coalition as contamination. The contradiction does not trouble them, you see, because the standard is not a consistent principle. The standard is which side acts. Postmodern skepticism began in part as a critique of domination. In political practice, its degraded popular form can become an instrument of domination. There is no neutral truth, only our narrative and their narrative. And there is no persuasion, only power. There is no loyal opposition, only enemies. And that is nihilism, or if you prefer, nihilism. Potato, potato. That's nihilism, wearing the costume. Nihilism is a belief in nothingness, wearing the costume of liberation. It enters announcing that it has freed you from somebody else's truth. And it ends by ordering you to repeat its own vocabulary. It's perfectly adapted to the internet, where language games become engagement, identity becomes branding, and moral denunciation becomes currency. Now, let us not turn these people into a conspiracy. That's just, that's intellectually lazy. And it's politically, it's unnecessary. These are different individuals with different constituencies, different relationships, different responsibilities. Abdul El Sayed demonstrates the possibility of a progressive upset, but also the demonstration of the danger of mistaking a one-point plurality. This is 1 point in a divided primary for a mandate to scold the rest of the party. And again, Hassan Piker. And again, he's not a DSA member. He's not even a DSA member. So do not say that I said that he was. Hassan Piker, so recently referenced, demonstrates the collision between the influencer incentives and the coalition politics. The influencer gains from conflict. The candidate must gain from addition. Francesca Hong demonstrates that enthusiasm in Madison and online does not automatically become a statewide working class majority, although coming within roughly half a point certainly demonstrates that the constituency is substantial and should not be dismissed. Daria Liza Villechevalier and other New York DSA victors demonstrate genuine strength in Democratic primaries while leaving unanswered, unfortunately, whether that strength expands the national map or rearranges a blue delegation. Zohran Mamdani demonstrates both the electoral potency of affordability politics, free this, free that, and which is all ultra vires. That sounds good, but ultra vires means outside your power. That's never going to play with Hochul, the governor of New York. That's the rest of New York State is not going to say, yeah, let's give New York City this free stuff. That's not going to happen. Do you understand why I say this is performative? Why it's performative demonstration? This affordability politics, it's nonsense. It's ultra vires. It's outside Mamdani's power. He doesn't have the power to do it because it'd have to be okayed by the state of New York, and that's not going to happen. So, all right. So, the rapid transition from maximalist resistance rhetoric to pragmatic engagement with Trump once governing responsibility arrives. Angie Nixon gives the movement a cleaner test. She has a statewide nomination in Florida. Can she take the economic case beyond the existing Democratic electorate? Can she contest Republican power rather than merely reorganize Republican power? Or I should say Democratic power. We'll see. If she does it, give her credit. If she does not, do not call the nomination itself a working class realignment. The conclusion is not that all of these people are frauds in every respect. That would be lazy, tempting, but lazy. And again, we don't need to do it. The conclusion is that their successes don't prove what their admirers say they prove. They do not yet prove that a national working class movement exists. They do not prove that an ideological intensity wins swing states. They do not prove that attacking democratic institutions is the path to defeating Trump. And the behavior of the surrounding media ecosystem, the pikers, the streamers, the activists, the purity enforcers, they may make governing majorities harder to build. So now, after all is said and done, let's bring this home, okay? What kind of government do we have? People want me to say it is an oligarchy. Other people, they want me to say is already a fascist dictatorship. I understand the impulse. I understand what they mean about oligarchy. But its most fundamental level, the United States remains a democratic republic because the franchise still exists. And that means we still have the vote, the sacred vote. And the vote matters because it is the mechanism by which people may remove power without bloodshed. And believe me, you don't want the alternative. Now, the qualification is enormous. Oligarchs work constantly to narrow the franchise, and let's not pretend that it is any different. I stated this at the beginning. This is what they are dedicated to do. They wrap themselves in the flag, they shout and preach egalitarianism, but that is not what they are. What they want to do is narrow the franchise. They want to distort it. They want to purchase influence around it. They want to proscribe those who may use it, and similarly prescribe those who use it, to limit it and to make public choice less effective. And they would take it away if they could do so safely. And that makes them enemies, quite frankly, of popular government. And I do not use the phrase lightly. Donald Trump goes further. He seeks to turn a constitutional office into a personal rule. He surrounds himself with kakistocratic toadies. And kakistocracy, by the way, it comes from the Greek kakistos. It means government by the worst, the very worst people. And if you want the word, there it is. Palace courtiers who are afraid, who can be abused, who are willing to compromise their principles. You see them every day on TV, who love their jobs, their entitlements, their privileges, their perquisites, and who understand that access to the king is the source of everything that they have. He treats allies as debtors, Trump that is. He treats government as his property. He teaches his followers to confuse loyalty to him with loyalty to the country. And this is not new, by the way. Bush Jr. was like this. Reagan was like this. And the answer to that cannot be a faction which reduces politics to enemies, treats persuasion as weakness, and subordinates broad solidarity into ideological discipline. We do not defeat the kingmen by building a rival court. We do not answer palace toadies with a different collection of palace toadies. We do not defeat a cult of personality with a cult of influencers. And we do not defend working people merely by saying workers when we're organizing politics. Around factions workers are ordered to join. Now, here's the economic point, the point on which the whole argument turns. The great economic engine is it's not the billionaire looking down on everybody from the penthouse. It is not the speculator watching numbers move across the screen. It is not the oligarch who produces nothing but a change in the ownership papers. It is the broad productive population. It is the people who go to work, operate the machinery, open the shop, treat the patient, teach the child, repair the road, design the aircraft, deliver the freight, pay the mortgage, purchase the goods, and raise the next generation. Did I cover everything on that? But it's true. That's who it is. That's the engine. That is the motive force. That is where the wealth for the nation actually comes from. And maintaining that engine is not socialism. I want to say it again because this definitional fraud has gone on long enough. And I have stood by and watched it for years and even decades and just been disgusted by it. And so I will, if you will allow me, vent my spleen when I say this fraud has gone on long enough. Maintaining the engine is not socialism. Putting oil in an automobile does not abolish the automobile. Repairing the road does not abolish private transportation. Educating the technician so he can repair the vehicle does not abolish private enterprise. Keeping the nurse healthy does not collectivize the hospital. And housing a family does not dissolve the market. Public power, public credit, public works, labor protection, social insurance, and strategic public ownership have all existed inside an American mixed economy. They made the country capable, and a country that cannot do things is not saved by the private ownership of its incapacity. It's not saved by the trillionaire. The DSA does not own these ideas. Furthermore, the Republican right does not possess the authority to exile them from American history. They belong to the American system of Alexander Hamilton, of Henry Clay, of Abraham Lincoln, of Theodore Roosevelt, of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. They belong to the New Deal, the American system, the general welfare, the national defense, and the elementary obligation of a country not to destroy the human machinery upon which its prosperity depends. So take back the policies, take back the history, take back the language. Do not surrender the New Deal to people who did not invent it. And do not surrender the public sector to people who want to destroy it and then examine political conduct. If a movement claims to represent workers, ask whether its organizers are workers who are presently represented by Republicans. Ask whether it contests Republican power where Republican power is strong. Ask whether its victories widen the national map. Ask whether it adds people to the coalition capable of defeating Trump. Or does it enter democratic politics? Retain a separate organization? Use the Democratic ballot line? Attack Democratic incumbents? Scold Democratic constituencies? And celebrate the capture of safely Democratic territory as though another Republican had been driven from office? Trotsky would have understood the distinction I'm making here. The external enemy supplies the justification. The host party supplies the battlefield. Now, the actual task is harder. It is less glamorous. It does not produce quite as many satisfying denunciations on the internet. Build a majority. Defend the vote. Protect constitutional government. Break oligarchical control over money and politics wherever it may lie, wherever the chips fall. Break it. Restore public credit for productive purposes. Raise wages. Rebuild industry. Guarantee health care. Strengthen labor. Construct housing. Educate, feed, protect, and recreate the productive population that drives the economy. Hold allies accountable without abandoning them. Tell the truth, even when the truth inconveniences your own side. That is democratic politics. That is working in middle-class politics. And in 2026, it may be the narrow bridge between a damaged republic and a country by the kingman. And so I come back to the question with which we began. Are you for the Constitution? Are you for the democratic republic? Or are you merely searching for a ruler who hates the same people you hate? That is the question of 2026. Not 2028, 2026. And this is Politics by Jake.